Praise be Jesus Christ, and welcome to Catholic Forum. I'm your guest host, Alan Dunst, and today we're going to be talking about innovation in Catholic education. Education obviously has become a national hot topic with ongoing debates over Common Core, standardized testing, federal influence of curriculum, etc. And one place that some people are going to look for an answer to the question of what happened to our educational system is backward, to a method of education that goes back to ancient Greece and Rome. So when a Catholic school, who are already performing head and shoulders above their public school peers, goes and explores this new direction, it's worth talking about. And to talk about it with us today, we have the faculty of one school in our diocese that is taking on that transition from Sacred Heart of Jesus Parish. So I'd like to introduce you to Tim Walsh, Dean of Students at Sacred Heart, Zach Good, who is the Provost, and Sean Maltby, who is their new headmaster. So welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for having us.
First of all, I want to talk about some of the terminology, because many people may not understand these terms. They're used to principal and vice principal, maybe, right? And secretary, provost, and that kind of thing. How do those relate to, in terms of function in the classical model of education? What are the roles actually doing?
We have learned over the past year or so, as we make our way into this new method of doing things, that sharing the administrative responsibility seems to make the most amount of sense. So as Dean of Students, I work with, of course, students, some of the problems that they might encounter, making sure that the student body is, frankly, on top of things and obedient and doing what they're supposed to be doing. Working with parents and basically things within the building. And we have Zach Good, our Provost, who is in charge of curriculum development and overseeing things that you may see more from the outside, such as selection of textbooks, materials, course design, as well as scheduling. And then we have our headmaster, Mr. Maltby, who is responsible for overseeing everything that's, I suppose you classify it as external, dealing with the diocese, marketing, working with parents, but it really is a shared responsibility.
Excellent. So why don't we start off by kind of exploring what is that definition of classical model? When we say a classical model, what are we talking about?
Classical means a couple of things with respect to both the curriculum and just the way that instruction is handled in the classroom. And so from the curriculum perspective, which is most of my role as provost, a classical curriculum brings in the best that has been thought and said, as Matthew Arnold put it. And so we read at the elementary level. We have a full-time students for K through 8. We read the good books in preparation for the great books. And so this means Chronicles of Narnia, Wind in the Willows, and at the same time, rigorous math curriculum. We'll be instituting Singapore math next year. We teach Latin all the way through, from first grade on up. And so classical is both returning to those important cultural touchstones in our own literary tradition and bringing in the culture that's literally classical of Greece and Rome.
Interesting. Now, I know that there are actually a couple of other terms that are kind of unique to the style that I want to explore. The trivium, did I say that right?
Yes,
trivium,
that's right.
and quadrivium. Can you explain to us what those mean and what is their roles in the classical model?
Yeah, absolutely. So trivium and quadrivium, quick Latin lesson here. The Latin via is way, and so the trivium is a meeting of three ways, the quadrivium a crossroads. And so the trivium is grammar, logic, and rhetoric, and this is something that was implicit in the Greeks and became explicit in the Christian Middle Ages as the method of how do we go about taking any given student and forming them mind, body, and soul? So it begins with the trivium studies, grammar, logic, rhetoric, often ordered sequentially, but they do inform each other, leading to the quadrivium, the higher studies, music, astronomy, arithmetic, geometry. So these formed the basis of the classical and were developed into the medieval curriculum, which is a distinctly Catholic thing.
All righty. Now, there's an old saying that says, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And Catholic schools, as I mentioned earlier, have been shown, objectively superior in terms of their results, so that they're achieving already. So, what was it that kind of led Sacred Heart on this journey?
Well, Alan, I think what you say generally has been accepted as true, or an expectation of Catholic education through the years, that we were superior in the way we educated, even if we did it in a similar fashion to the public schools. But unfortunately, I think the reality of that reputation has eroded over the years. I mean, in fact, what used to be Sacred Heart of Jesus Parish School is now refounded as Sacred Heart Academy. And one of the reasons for that refounding, if you will, and this venture into the classical curriculum had to do with the reality that the school was dwindling in enrollment, and just was getting to the point that it wasn't financially viable to keep it open, despite the fact that it might have provided a high quality education even in the form that it was in. It wasn't attracting students. Parents weren't necessarily willing to pay that money for what they maybe saw as a negligible difference in the quality. Part of that is our own fault, because I think one of the things you'll find is how Catholic was the Catholic school and the identity. And so part of the refounding of the school as the academy was to reclaim that Catholic identity. And so we start every day with daily Mass, it's one of the few schools in the country that even does that. So all the students begin the day in the source and summit of our faith. And then that truth is reinforced throughout the day with, as Zach said, the best that had been thought and said in Western civilization. It's really the best that's been thought and said about the truth of the Incarnation, that God became man for us. And the idea is that we are teaching our children to answer the largest questions that they have. Who am I? What am I made for? What am I going to do with my life?
Thank you. And I know that, in terms of, we talked about eroding, enrollment, and that's going on nationally, and I know that even at Sacred Heart, in its heyday, there were like 900 students in that school, and so that obviously is a source of concern. I know that one constituency in the parish is homeschoolers. They've become more and more, I think, vocal and present in kind of in reaction to what they're seeing in the educational systems. And I'm wondering, especially as Sacred Heart is the home of the Latin Mass for the diocese, were they of any influence in the decision to kind of move this direction in hopes that you will get these kids that are being taught at home to appreciate the school, what the parish is bringing?
Well, in early discussions with Father Sirico, with their school board president, David Phelps, among others, we did discuss how we can better serve the parish, being that it's a parish ministry, it's a parish apostolate. And one of the great needs was how do we bring together a parish that has such a unique faction or group, such as those who attend Latin Mass, because that's a really unique thing for the diocese. And it was something that came up in discussion, but really in reference to how do we assist parents as the primary educators of their children in spreading the Catholic faith. And one of the greatest things that has happened is in offering part-time classes due to the hard work of Mr. Good. We're able to provide that opportunity to bring families in for something that they not only need, but as somebody who's been there for a decade, something I see is this just beautiful blending of the parish that was just missing before.
Right.
And it's so beneficial and wonderful for the academy.
Yeah, absolutely. We were working last summer to determine what would be the initial steps after that spiritual refounding, grounding the school in the sacraments. We then turned to how best to serve the families, and there are just as many homeschool students across the country as there are students in Catholic schools, and just as many in charter schools. So these are the segments of education that are growing and growing very rapidly. And so if we are going to be a ministry, which is what a school is first and foremost, we need to minister to our entire parish community. And so this year we started the classical enrichment courses program, the part-time program for the homeschooling students, with middle school and high school Latin, logic and rhetoric, apologetics, and iconography. And those are a great fit for the spiritual climate of Sacred Heart Academy and for the academic climate as well. And so next year we're anticipating that program to grow close to fourfold and to expand it to 1st through 12th grade for part-time students.
Excellent. Now, I know that while Sacred Heart Academy is not the first school ever to go to this direction, it is fairly young. It's a fairly young movement. But have there been any other schools that you've been able to reach out to get some guidance and some, learn some lessons and that kind of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. The classical education movement was largely something claimed by Protestants in the last couple of decades, and it's just now starting to really have an influence in Catholic schools around the country. This year we'll be attending with the entire faculty the 2nd annual Catholic Classical Education Conference, hosted by a school that did precisely what we're doing, taking an existing parish school and transitioning it into a classical academy, St. Jerome School. And they have a fantastic curriculum which they've made public. That's been a big help to us, and we'll be interacting this summer with a lot of their leaders and a lot of the people that worked directly on that curriculum to help develop our own faculty going into the new year.
Okay, and I was going to ask, and the next question I had for you was involving the curriculum in that transition, because you're teaching some subjects that aren't frequently taught, like Latin. So I was going to ask you, what type of things are you doing in terms of preparing the faculty and making sure that they're ready to handle that type of curriculum?
Yeah, this year we've undertaken quite a bit of professional development to acquaint our staff with classical education. We started incorporating the Latin curriculum, book changes here and there throughout the curriculum, but the big change is really coming in the fall. And we're not only expanding our staff, we have a couple staff members who are retiring, and so we have this opportunity for a really significant influx of staff members who already have that classical background. And so what we're going to get to cultivate over this summer through that conference that we're going to, and through staff training in August, is a spiritual and intellectual climate that just aligns perfectly with the vision that we've worked to establish this year. And so those teachers, most of them have the classical background, and so we'll really get to go deeper in the coming year, which is something I'm really looking forward to.
Awesome, excellent. Now, obviously, in the world of public schools, the big topic is Common Core and that type of thing. And one thing that is interesting about your direction versus Common Core, kind of eschews rote learning, memorization. The classical model typically embraces it and sees it as a primary building block. So I was wondering what your take has been on Common Core as you've been kind of heading the other direction.
Well, a lot of the controversy, and I think a lot of the controversy stems from the idea of loss of local control more than any other factor. I mean, I think that scares a lot of people, and I think rightfully so. But the idea behind, and you specifically touched on, rote memorization, if you will. The idea behind the classical curriculum is in the grammar, the logic, and the rhetoric stages. Those stages are designed to be focused specifically to the aptitude of the kid or the child at a particular age. For example, the grammar stage, that's where most of the memorization takes place, because that's when they're sponges. The children are sponges, and we underestimate, I think, the capability of a human child to learn and to absorb material. And I think what happens with not just the Common Core, but any curriculum that isn't focused on truth and the fullness of everything it means to be a human person created in the image and likeness of God, is you narrow your vision. So when you focus in on a certain standard or a certain set of standards to the exclusion of these other things, you are narrowing your vision, and you're not encompassing all that we're created to be. So I think that is where we are headed, and we are still a diocesan school, but it's a completely different approach to education, and the diocese is very supportive of what we're doing.
And I think with Common Core, and we see this not just in education but throughout our society, there's an attempt to systemize and systemize and systemize. And with something like education, it's a matter of individual persons. And so with something like Common Core, it's an attempt to have a machine that if we put the raw material in here, we get the product we want on the other side. And education has to be, to a certain extent, dynamic. And what Sean said is right on about the grammar stage. There's a stage at which this is what students want to do. They care about the what, and the second grader isn't yet ready for the why. And so when you impose critical thinking on the second grader, there's frustration on both sides. But when you say, come with me and let's walk through this beautiful poem, the second grader has now memorized 50 lines of poetry, and you think, well, that was easy. And so it's a matter of working with not only the truth of human nature and development, but the individual as well.
Right. And not too long ago, we were privileged to have Superintendent David Faber on the show with us. And one thing he did point out was that, Common Core, in terms of the Catholic school, really was at the service of the school in terms of, the identity of being a Catholic school and the mission of, So that was very interesting. And so I was going to ask you about, the type of support you've gotten from the diocese. What kind of manifestations have that taken on in terms of?
The diocese, especially Dave Faber personally, has been absolutely fantastic. Since last year, coming in and being so incredibly helpful in looking at Sacred Heart of Jesus School as it was, and how great it was, yet how low the enrollment was, and what financial difficulties we had. Absolutely supportive of a lot of different ideas. In the beginning stages, we're praying and thinking and throwing ideas up against the wall to see what could possibly stick and work. And through a lot of prayer and thought, that's how we landed on just how wonderful classical dovetails with their Catholic faith. It's just a wonderful method or vessel, if you will, to bring the Catholic faith to the children. It's been supportive throughout and continues to be. I mean, the diocese recognizes that there are different approaches to education, even within their own diocesan schools. I mean, there are quite a number of schools that are not quite the mold that you might have seen even 20 years ago amongst diocesan schools, where they're very similar, just regionalized, or it was just a geographic difference. So, been completely supportive and wonderful, both spiritually and professionally.
Yeah, and I know David mentioned that that's one of the keystones of Catholic education too. It can be innovative when it needs to be, that kind of thing. And you mentioned kind of narrowing of focus. And I want to talk a little bit about that because another kind of trend out there is going on to this STEM curriculum, which I got to make sure I say this right. It's science, technology, engineering and math. Yeah, so got them all in the right order.
Well, and as I mean, Zach pointed out, obviously the quadrivium talks about, you know, some of the scientific outgrowth of the trivium, if you will. But I mean, grammar, logic, and rhetoric, those are the stages of the trivium, but that's not to the exclusion of the beauty and truth of the natural world, which is what science and mathematics explains, quite frankly. And so it's just, again, that narrow focus is you're narrowing in on certain truths. I mean, 2 + 2 is 4. That's a truth. A triangle is is defined by a figure that has 3 sides and 3 angles, and there's relationships that are true about those sides and those angles. The idea behind, you hear about STEM and this focus on STEM, and we really need to improve, you know, science and math scores and things like that. The problem is the approach that we're taking to learning. Children learn. We talked about this already. The what stage. You know. What is this? What is that? What is this? Right. The why stage. Why? Why do I have to do it this way? Why do I have to do that? And you get a lot of that, and that's where a lot of the frustration builds, I think, in the science and math, and where children go off track and just get frustrated with it and walk away from, you know, being interested in science and math. The idea behind what we're doing is we engage the heart first, and they have to love what they're learning before they'll learn it. The truth is the same. It really is. Right. And so just because it's not a specialized STEM curriculum that's going to prepare them for a certain job or a certain career path isn't a negative. We have to think about what we want for our children in a different way. If we truly want the best for our children, that's not defined by the best job or the best college. The best is heaven. Right. So I call it salvation prep. And if we prep them for salvation, they'll be ready for any college, they'll be ready for any career.
Awesome. Now you mentioned the support you've gotten from the diocese. I was curious, and you also mentioned in terms of the trivium how it's kind of sequential to a large degree. I was wondering, does the adoption of this kind of model have any impact on the secondary education, the high school, where these students have to go to next?
Yeah, I think to some degree, I mean, it's beginning to organically and naturally, and maybe you can speak to that from the enrichment courses and the success you've already had with that at the high school level.
Yeah, we do have part-time students in 9th through 12th grades, and at teaching in that program, there's a great benefit to that. And I think more and more we'll see as we have 8th graders who are 2nd, 3rd, 4th year Latin students. There's the strong potential of a need to carry that to the secondary level, and what that looks like we don't know yet. But we're excited to have students who are ready for that, ready to really see the fruits of what this education can do.
Have you gotten any feedback from the diocese in terms of their readiness for that, or their consideration of that?
Well, we've talked about the trivium and how it's structured, the grammar, the logic, the rhetoric, and when you sort of overlay that with age groups, the rhetoric stage really is the older, the upper middle school and then into the high school age children. So the continuation of that education into a high school curriculum it will be a natural outgrowth, and I think the diocese will be supportive of doing what it takes to ensure that if we show number one, success, and quite frankly, the parents are the primary educators of their children, and if they come in and say, this has been beautiful, I enrolled him at Sacred Heart Academy in 5th grade. He took 4 years of Latin. He studied through this curriculum. I want him to continue in this curriculum, and how are we going to do that? And so we're thinking about it, and we've talked about it with Mr. Faber about what that might look like, and it's not, everyone has an open mind about what we're doing because they see, I think everyone sees the natural beauty of what we're doing, and if we can make it successful, and the true success will be, you know, the kids and the parents and what they think about it.
Okay. Now, I want to take a moment because a lot of people may not realize that the classical education model really was in place for a long time, you know, and it was only relatively recently that we've gone to other methods. Can you give a little bit of history on that, on how where we kind of went away from the classical model? And
Sure. Yeah. Basically, the classical model was pervasive throughout Greco-Roman history, through the Middle Ages. Really, the break happens in the early 20th century, where we have a couple competing views of what education is. John Dewey basically proposes a politicizing of education. This is how we make citizens, and insofar as we control the education process, we control what sort of a citizenry we have in the long run. Competing with that are along come, especially after the Second World War, really utilitarian views of education, and STEM to a certain degree is an outgrowth of that. Just this is a matter of competitive advantage, growing the GDP in effect. So the two ends of education as we see them in mainstream education today are to create the type of citizens we want for the political system. I mean, public education creates public servants in a way, and the other side is for moving forward that economic engine. Both of those confuse the real end of education, right? Which is not in money or in any organizing of the political scene, but in the development of human potential.
Sure. Well, I want to thank you all, for being here. It's been very enlightening, and appreciate your time, and we wish you much success, and I'm sure we'll have you back on to kind of give us a report card, as it were,
We'd be happy
of
to
your
do it,
progress. So thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
And we thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again. In the meantime, God bless you in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.